Hi, I'm Josh Block, host of Uncover Escaping Nexium from CBC Podcasts. I pull back the curtain on the secretive self-help group that experts call a cult and follow one woman's harrowing journey to get out. The podcast was featured in Rolling Stone magazine and named one of the best podcasts of 2018 in The Atlantic. Listen to Uncover Escaping Nexium on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is a CBC podcast.
I want to go to my trap line one last time, he says. I cannot breathe. I know he hasn't been to his trap line for almost 7 decades. We've been on a journey as father and son for 30 years, and for the first time, it feels like we've found our destination. And I think maybe we've been headed there all this time. Whatever truth exists between us, the end of our journey is in front of us.
That's David A. Robertson, reading from Blackwater, Family Legacy, and Blood Memory, one of 3 books he has coming out this fall. To say he's prolific is a bit of an understatement. The Cree writer, based in Winnipeg, started writing in 2009 and has already published more than 20 titles. From the Governor General award-winning picture book, When We Were Alone, to his graphic novel series, The Reckoner, to his first novel, The Evolution of Alice, published in 2014, it seems like he can write in any genre for any age group. David A. Robertson is my guest on the show today. Thanks so much for being here, David.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So this month, you published your most personal book to date, a memoir called Blackwater, Family Legacy, and Blood Memory, which we just heard a bit from. And it chronicles the story of your dad's return to the family trapline near Norway House, Cree Nation, in northern Manitoba. So first off, most people wait until they're a lot older to write a memoir. So why did you want to write one now?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's probably a bunch that goes into that answer. One of them is that, I've been talking about my dad and I for the last 11 years. Ever since I was a published writer, I found that when I was public speaking, all of my talks somehow came back to my father and I. And he's played such a big role in my own development, my understanding of, who I am as a Cree person. There was one time I was giving this lecture at University of Manitoba a couple years ago where it was the same thing where I was talking about my life and my father and our relationship. And the professor came up to me after and said, "You really have to write this down." And so, it's funny, as a writer, I had never thought about writing actually my own story. And that really kind of jogged something in me where, I decided that was something I needed to do. The other part of it is that, my father at the time was declining. I mean, he was still himself and he was still my dad, but we knew that our time with him was short. It was getting shorter. And I really wanted to start working on this because it was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to document his life and our relationship, the teachings he gave me for myself and for my family. And so all of this kind of came together and made me feel this urgency to write the story now. And certainly when we went to the trapline together 2 years ago, it felt like the framing for the story had happened because I think it was where we were journeying to, all these years together. That's where we were going to. And so when we got there, it felt like the right time to document everything that had happened between us and in our own lives.
That seems like such a special trip to be able to go on.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know if I could even put it into words. I tried my best in the book, but it was, Blood Memory is in the title of the book. And I really did feel that Blood Memory was something that played a big role into, why Blackwater, why this trapline my dad grew up on felt home to me. As soon as I stepped off the boat onto the land, I just felt like I'd come home. And I know that watching Dad, amble up the incline towards this big boulder in the middle of this clearing, I know he felt like he was home too. It was just an incredibly emotional, intensely emotional moment for us. And it turned out that it was the only time it could have happened because, Dad passed away just this past December. And it made me even more grateful for spending that time with him and being able to write about that experience through his words and my own.
And did you learn anything about yourself while writing a memoir? I know that, when you go into material like this, you sort of have to dig back and sort of excavate your own life and sort of re-examine things maybe in a new perspective. Did you learn anything about yourself?
Yeah, I think anytime you revisit your past and learn more about the people who came before you, you're inevitably going to learn more about who you are. I've always said, and I've learned from my dad, the process of, understanding ourselves and who we are, that journey starts well before we were born. It starts with understanding who came before you. And, certainly in this book, it talks about my grandmother and my dad and their lives before I was born and my dad's life after I was born. And all of that plays into forming a sense of identity. It helps you to understand more about yourself. And there's things that in even researching this book that I learned that kind of, forced me to recontextualize my life and my identity. When I was a kid, I always believed that my parents grew up intentionally raising me to be non-Indigenous, to protect me from, what they felt I would have experienced growing up in the city in Winnipeg as a Cree kid. And in the process of researching this book, and a lot of that research was just sitting down with my dad and spending hours with him talking, he said, that's not true. I never wanted to tell you what it meant to be Aboriginal, but I never told you that I didn't want you to be. My goal was to kind of model that for you, but to give you the tools that you needed to figure out for yourself. And one of the things that always sticks with me is he said, how am I going to teach you how to be Cree? You are Cree. So nothing I can say can make you more or less Cree. Your journey is to find what that means for yourself. And his role was to kind of guide me in a way to that understanding. And I think he did that.
Yeah. And I mean, without giving any spoilers here, I know that wasn't always your relationship with him, right? This relationship that you established with him. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like, what your relationship was like growing up with him?
When I was younger, all through my formative years leading up to high school, my dad and my mother were separated. So I saw my dad, every weekend or every other weekend. But, I think in those times, you don't really get into these deep life questions. You don't really kind of ask your dad about where he came from or his life. You just want to see your dad. You want to, go to a movie with him. You want to go golfing with him. And so I didn't learn the things that I learned later in life when I was a kid from him, and I didn't try to. And so I grew up really disconnected as a result to my own Cree background, my Cree identity. Also, at the same time, I was learning all this negativity. So I was inundated with all these negative stereotypes, these things that formed this really low self-perception of myself as a Cree person because, I saw the noble savage stereotype in comic books. I saw the savage Indian on film and in TV and in the news, all these misrepresentations. And so I grew up disconnected from all of that. As much as, I saw my dad intermittently, he just wasn't giving me what I needed to learn about, to give me the tools to learn about who I was. And then this incredible thing happened in high school, or just before high school. My parents reconciled, and they'd been apart for about 10 years. And so when my dad moved back in with us, all of a sudden he was there all the time. So like having breakfast with Dad, watching him do the crossword puzzle in the morning, I say in the book, coming home late and having him be mad at me, waiting up, worried, was new. And so we kind of went through this process of first like figuring out what it meant to be that sort of father and son for the first time. And then when we got through all that, it was developing our relationship and me learning about his life and what he did for his work and meeting his friends. And so as I kind of learned all these things, and that was when we got into like the Cree value system, his Cree background, living on the trap line, all these things, we became, I would say, more than father and son. He became my best friend. He was my best man at my wedding. He's been there for me for the past 30 years whenever I've needed him. He was my counselor. He was my everything. And so it's been a 30-year journey that I took with him that I'll always feel incredibly grateful for, as much as I don't have him around anymore.
I mean, I think it is, maybe a nice gift that you could give to yourself, that you did do the work of recording hours and hours of interviews with your dad. So you have all this tape, of your dad and other family members. And this was all research, right? Research for the book. But when you realized you had all this tape, you approached the CBC with an idea. And what did you want to do? What did you want to do with all of this tape?
Yeah, I realized at some point that I felt like people needed to hear his voice. As much as I feel like his personality and his life and everything comes through in the book, I felt like everything that he was saying, I wanted to share that in a different way. At one point, as I was getting all this footage and all these recordings of him, I approached CBC and asked if they would be interested in producing a podcast about the development of the book, but also the stories that I couldn't fit into the book. So kind of getting deeper into some different aspects of my family's history, or my relationship with my dad, or the teachings that he gave me. So I started working with Julie Dupre here in Winnipeg, and it became the podcast Kiweo. Well, obviously, I didn't know that I would lose him in halfway through doing this podcast with CBC called Kiweo, but it did become a way to honor his legacy, to honor his memory, and and it's been great to not only have all the hours of footage I have of my dad, but to have this new kind of story. I think that it's good for me to have, but I think more than that, it's good for his grandchildren to have, for my two brothers to have, for his sisters, and for his nieces and nephews. So as a family now, we have this other documentation of his life, and I think that more than ever now we value having that, and it's something that we all, I think, will cherish. At the same time, there's something for everybody in this story. It's not just for my family. There are things in Blackwater and the podcast which, I think it shows people a pathway not only to reconciliation, but to how they can come to their own identities, what that looks like in their own lives. I think that there's something universal in the story that anybody can take from it and I think get something out of that's meaningful.
And the podcast, it came out pretty recently, and it's gotten really great reviews, so congratulations on that as well. But in the opening of the second episode, you describe the moment when you knew you wanted to be a writer, and we're going to take a listen to that moment.
My name's David A. Robertson, and this is Kiweo. That's a Cree word. It means he goes home. I'm the he in that sentence, as I try to piece together my family history to better understand who I am. I clearly remember when I knew that I wanted to be a writer. I was in grade 3, and we had to do a poetry assignment. I took my foolscap paper, my red lead pencil, and did my work in the closet at the back of the classroom. And I wrote 10 poems, not one. I fell in love with writing, with the act of creating, of making something from nothing. At the end of class, I took all my poems and gave them to my teacher, Miss Ratusky. She transcribed them all and printed them out in a book that I called The Bestest Poems I Ever Sawed. After school, I ran home to my mom and announced that I would be a writer one day. That memory is so clear to me. I think the defining moments of our lives remain clear, no matter how far in the past they are, or how much further away they get.
That's a tiny bit of David A. Robertson's podcast created for CBC called Kiweo. And it's about his journey to learn more about his Cree heritage. The podcast is a companion to his new memoir, Blackwater, Family, Legacy, and Blood Memory, which is out now. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. Author David A. Robertson is my guest on the show today. And so you're used to working with words as a writer, right? And, what was it like having to work with audio and create this podcast?
In my writing career, I've worked very hard to challenge myself in the choices that I've made from a literary perspective. I've always wanted to become the best writer that I can be. That, to me, requires you to stretch beyond your comfort zone. And you need to be able to work in multiple disciplines in order to develop skills that you can apply to storytelling. And so, I've written graphic novels, I've written poetry and novels and picture books, and so that's all kind of helped me develop skills. And I've also written a little bit in television, so I think all of this helped me to start thinking about how I was going to approach storytelling from a podcast perspective. And I also say that listening to podcasts has helped me write podcasts. And it reminds me of one of the best writing advices I got from my professor in university in the late 90s. And he used to sit me down and he'd say, "Dave, do you want to be a good writer?" And I'd say, "Well, of course, Dr. Besner. That's what I want to do for my life." And he said, "Then you have to read." And what he meant was you have to be able to read other works to figure out how to be better yourself. And so when I'm writing podcasts, listening to podcasts helped me to understand how to approach storytelling in the form. I'd find the right way to deliver the story through my own voice. And that was probably the hardest thing to do, was to script out these episodes so that it sounded like I wasn't reading from a script. That was probably the hardest thing about writing a podcast. As I'm sure you can relate to that.
I can.
So I was always cognizant of how do I write this so it's how I would talk.
Yeah.
But I think you also just have to figure out how would I make it seem like if you're listening to right now, Phelan, that we're just sitting across from each other, and I'm telling you this story over a cup of coffee. Yeah. And that's what I wanted to get to with this podcast.
And that's what I love about podcasting too, right? It's such an intimate form. So it's really, you can't get much more intimate than just being right in someone's ears like that. And, especially with such a personal story.
Yeah. And it's very, I found it's very performative. You not only have to learn how to write it, you have to learn how to read it. And I think that, I remember reading the last episode, which was very hard for me because I wrote it after my dad died. And I had to perform it after my dad died. And I think I was trying to just get through it so much that I started just reading. Mm-hmm. And I remember Julie stopping me about a page into the script and saying, "Dave, you sound like a robot here. You're just reading this. You have to be it. You have to say this. You can't just read it. And you have to let those emotions in." And so in the end, I feel like it was the best episode of the podcast, but it was also, I was crying through the whole thing. And so it was, but that performative aspect was also hard because I'm not an actor. I'm not good at any of that. And so I had to learn how to do it for this podcast.
Well, let's take a listen to another clip of the podcast. Here's a bit of one of the interviews that you recorded with your dad, Donald Robertson.
Dad's spoken to me about remembering, about the importance of it, and how it connects to the importance of telling stories. I think of it now more than any other time when we're out on the land together, when we're home, in the place where we had always been traveling to.
Remembering is very important because it helps us to remember where we came from, to remember some of the ways of life that people followed in the old days, the way that they kept the stories alive, stories about way of life, stories about ceremonies, stories about legends like Tsakapis and Wisagetsach. There are a lot of stories that are told. And so one of the things that I think I like to do myself is to kind of sit down and look back on the life in the community and try to remember some of the things that happened.
That was a clip of the podcast Kiweo, created by author David A. Robertson. You spent a lot of time talking with your dad as you gathered stories for this memoir, and your father, as you mentioned, passed away late last year. So I'm really sorry for your loss. I am, that is, I can tell it definitely is a big part of, your life and what you're going through now. And and also these projects that you're working on. What's it like for you to hear his voice in your podcast now?
Just as I was listening to that, I was kind of closing my eyes and taking myself back to that moment when I was hearing it, live. And you do that, I think. You find ways to keep him alive. You find ways to bring yourself back to moments where you can imagine him being closer than he'll ever be now. It was bittersweet in that way because, you're finding that you miss him more than you thought you did in hearing his voice, knowing that, what you have is all you'll have. But you also appreciate how much he gave to you. You also appreciate the fact that even though, I talked about losing my mentor, losing my best friend, losing my father, at the same time, he's not really gone. And you can carry him with you in a different way. And I think the journey for me is trying to figure out what that way looks like. Like, how am I going to carry him with me in a good way? Because right now, a lot of it hurts. But there's a etching on my inscription on my grandfather's headstone that says, "To live in the hearts of others is to never die." And in that way, I know that because I've done the work and Dad did the work in documenting his voice and these gifts that he gave me and the gifts that he gives others, because I think he's really the star of this podcast. He's not really gone. He's still with me on this journey, because I think that I'm on a lifelong journey, and I wish he was with me for longer than he ended up being with me for. I know that I can carry him with me through the teachings that he gave me, and I'm lucky that I have his voice to listen to whenever I need him. And I find, sometimes I need him a lot still.
It's so nice because, I do think of our people, Indigenous people. This isn't our first pandemic. This isn't our first crisis, right? And we lost so many of our people and our elders, and we didn't have the medium of, podcasting or getting those voices down on record. And we lost so many of our libraries, right? Those were our libraries. So it's so nice that you have this volume, in your library that is your dad.
Yeah, we used to pass down these stories orally, and I think it's such a blessing that I have his voice. I like the way you put that in this library, that I can access, but also my kids can access, and my nephews and nieces can all access. And I know that a lot of them are too young to really, understand or even hear the teachings that my dad gave me. But in this way, he can give it to them too. And we've listened to the podcast as a family together, and it's been such a beautiful experience for my kids. They've really appreciated being able to hear their grandpa. That's, I think, a real gift.
Hi, I'm Michelle Shepard, host of Uncover Charmini from CBC Podcasts. In 1999, 15-year-old Charmini Anandavale disappeared on her way to a job that police believed didn't exist. 4 months later, her remains were found in a wooded ravine. I revisit the case that has stayed with me for over 20 years, ever since I first covered it as a cub crime reporter for the Toronto Star. You can find Uncover Charmini on CBC Listen or on your favorite podcast app.
Hi, I'm Josh Block, host of Uncover Escaping NXIVM from CBC Podcasts. I pull back the curtain on the secretive self-help group that experts call a cult and follow one woman's harrowing journey to get out. The podcast was featured in Rolling Stone magazine and named one of the best podcasts of 2018 in The Atlantic. Listen to Uncover Escaping NXIVM on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. Today we're talking to prolific author David A. Robertson. So we talked a bit about your new memoir, Blackwater, Family Legacy and Blood Memory, which is out now. But earlier this month, you had another book released, The Barren Grounds. And it's a book for middle grade aged kids between, 8 and 12 years old. And it's been described as Narnia meets Indigenous stories about, the sky and constellations. But in your own words, can you tell me what it's about?
It's actually a pretty good description. So it's this kind of mashup of a lot of different inspirations and a lot of different ways that I've wanted to focus my work over the last little while. Certainly, incorporating Cree legends of the sky and the stars has been something I've wanted to do for a while. I've done research in that area. I've read a lot of research in that area, and there's such beautiful, rich stories. A couple of them have really struck with me, and the first one was of the Fisher constellation. So, as a lot of people know, the Big Dipper, in the Cree worldview, the Big Dipper is actually called the Fisher constellation. And that story of how the Fisher came to be in the sky is something I adapted into the Barren Grounds. The beginning of that story is that Fisher and these animals in this village were living through this perpetual winter because these summer birds had been stolen. And the summer birds would fly across the North Country, and as they flew, they would change the seasons. And so it was this really beautiful story about the Fisher and the summer birds. And then I think, portal stories are something I've always been interested in. The Chronicles of Narnia is also a portal story, a fantasy portal story. And I wanted to challenge myself to take classical literature and reimagine it through an Indigenous lens. And because of all these parallels were happening between what I wanted to do and what I was interested in and the Chronicles of Narnia, I drew a lot of inspiration to C.S. Lewis's work as I was writing this series. From a continued kind of an Indigenous perspective, I wanted to write about the foster care system for quite a long time. And I was waiting for the right story to be able to do it. And this story was my opportunity, I felt. So what you have is these two foster kids who have been apprehended and are in the care of in the same foster home. And Morgan has been in foster care for her whole life, and Eli has been in foster care for 2 weeks. And so I wanted to, through their story and talking about the impacts that loss has had, the loss of culture, the loss of language, the loss of family, talk about the impacts the foster care system has in real life for Indigenous kids across Canada in a way that doesn't traumatize anybody, but that informs and starts to help people think about the foster care system and the way it has treated Indigenous children over the course of the last several decades. I really wanted to talk about that. And then it talks about land protection and land stewardship and the environment as they get into this other reality and find that they have to save it, and why, not to give anything away, but why it's been thrust into this eternal winter. I think it's this journey story that you can be entertained by, but you can also learn a lot from. And I think good literature enables you to do that.
And why do you think it's important to include Indigenous characters in your writing?
I think for any writer, for any reader, the inclusion of marginalized characters is vitally important. And it's something that, I've tried to do throughout the course of my career. Any book that I've written has had an Indigenous character as the hero, as the central character. And it does a few things. It helps Indigenous kids, or Indigenous adults, frankly, who are reading these books. It helps them to see themselves reflected in stories, in mainstream literature. And that's a really empowering thing, in particular for youth. Because as a youth, if you read middle grade fiction, if you read YA, if you read, any sort of picture books, you're so often reading a white character in the hero role. And if anything, you have these marginalized characters in periphery roles that have no impact on the story. And it does damage. And oftentimes these periphery characters are misrepresented. So, they're not accurately written. I think about my experience as a kid and how reading these characters had such a negative impact on me, and how I wanted to change that for kids now. And so I've seen that. I've seen how Indigenous kids reading these books feel empowered by seeing themselves reflected in literature. One of the first classes I read when we were alone to, which is my picture book, was a predominantly Cree class in the inner city here in Winnipeg. And after I read it, the teacher asked, "What did you like most about this book?" And all the kids put their hands up, and they all said that the kids either looked like them or they spoke their language. And it was this incredibly powerful moment. So that's always front of mind for me. I also think it's important for non-Indigenous readers to read Indigenous characters that have real backgrounds, that have agency over their lives, that have an impact on the stories that they're in. And it helps to educate non-Indigenous kids, non-Indigenous readers about our cultures, our communities, our families, our languages, because it helps us to learn about each other.
And when you were growing up, you always knew you wanted to be a writer, right? That was very clear to you from a young age. What kind of stories were you drawn to?
So I always read comics. I mostly read comics.
Which ones? Which comics?
So my favorite was always Spider-Man. I read a lot of Spider-Man. I read Firestorm. I read The Avengers, obviously. And I read lesser-known ones like Elf Quest. And so all these comics, especially, the superhero ones, like Firestorm, for example, had Indigenous characters that were not representative of truth, of the truth of our cultures, of our communities. And so while I was drawn to them, as I was reading them, it was also very destructive for me. And it was destructive for any reader who was, reading these characters and seeing these Indigenous people always doing the same thing, right? So they always were wearing, these headdresses. They were always, bare-chested. They were always wearing these like leather pants, and they would do these war cries. And it was just like the embodiment of the noble savage and the savage Indian. Or I was reading books where we weren't in them at all. And I love these books, but I wasn't seeing myself in them, and it was teaching me nothing about who I was. And I think stories have a responsibility to teach us and to help us to understand and learn about each other. And so the stories that I was drawn to while I was enjoying what I was reading, I think in hindsight I saw how damaging they were to me, and I didn't realize it at the time. But I certainly recognize it now, and that's really what's given me the focus that I have had as a writer over the past, 11, 12 years.
So you're not wearing a fringe vest with no shirt and leather pants right now, then?
Well, I don't think anybody would want to see that, but I'm also I've got a very, very I've got very much a dad bod right now, as my kids would say. But no one wants to see that. No one wants to see that. So I'm not wearing it. That's the thing is I think that what I wanted people to understand too is that because I talk the way I do, I wear what I wear, I like what I do. I'm just as much Cree as anybody else, and I think it's like trying to talk about the worldview of the fact that we're not pan-Indigenous, that like, no one would have guessed that I was Cree growing up. And I think as I was a kid, I saw that as an advantage because I could hide from who I was. But now I want people to understand that the fact that I am who I am, it doesn't make me more or less Cree than anybody else. I am Cree no matter what I do or what I say. Right now I'm wearing just like a black T-shirt and blue jeans, and I'm surrounded by action figures, and I'm a huge nerd, and I'm also Cree, So,
yes,
and that's cool. Like that's cool with me,
Well, you did mention your dad bod, so let's talk about your kids. You've got 5 of them. And, do they inspire you to write? Do they give you feedback, or do they give you ideas?
Let me first say that I entirely blame my dad bod on the pandemic. It is an abundance of chips. No, but I have 5 kids, and they're all the way from 5 years old to 17 years old, and they do inspire me. I think all youth inspire me because I know that our future is in the hands of the youth, and it sounds kind of cheesy and cliched, but it's actually true. The work that we do with kids is going to help determine what kind of future that we live in. Because they are the ones who are going to be making the decisions for us. They are going to be the leaders in this country and in this world. And I think a lot about the stories I want to tell my kids and the tools that I want to give them to be able to be better leaders. But I also think about their safety in this world, and especially because I have 3 daughters and 3 Indigenous daughters who are Cree Métis. I have a real concern for their safety. And that has given me the focus to write a lot about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, because I want to raise awareness for the epidemic in this country. I want people to think about the role that they have in overcoming that epidemic. And I want my daughters to be able to walk home from school and not feel nervous if they're a few minutes late. And I think that's a real concern. So as much as I want to teach my kids things about their backgrounds and their cultures and give them the tools that I didn't have when I was a kid earlier, I also want them to be safe, because I've also reached non-Indigenous people. And we're all recognizing that we have a shared responsibility to make this a better place to live in, a safer place to live in, and that we all have a role in reconciliation. And I think in that process of healing as a community, as a large community, stories play a very important role. And so my stories are a small piece in the collection of stories that are available that we can learn from. And so my kids are probably the biggest inspiration in my life in the stories that I tell and why I tell them.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. Today, an extended conversation with author David A. Robertson. So we've already talked about two of your books out this month, Blackwater and The Barren Grounds, and you actually have a third book coming out this fall, Breakdown, which is the first part of the Reckoner Rises series. But the characters, they aren't new. They originally appeared in the Reckoner trilogy. So why did you want to revisit these characters in a new series?
So the trilogy was, it was a YA novel trilogy called The Reckoner. And that trilogy was always supposed to be a backstory for how Cole Harper, the main character, became a Cree superhero. And it was very much like Unbreakable, the movie Unbreakable by M. Night Shyamalan, how that really is just like a backstory. It's like the first part of the development of a hero. And so I've always wanted to continue Cole Harper's story beyond the pages of the trilogy. The Reckoner Rises is his continued story as he continues to develop into the hero that he can be. It reflects a lot of the stuff that I loved as a kid in the superhero stories that I was reading. But it also is a way for me to continue my work in representing Indigenous people in a more positive and truthful light in the many different forms of literature that I've tackled in my career. And I think Cole Harper's story goes a step further in that it also talks about mental health, and that's something that has been very important for me in both the Reckoner trilogy as a YA series, but also in the graphic novels. And there's an importance in reflecting people's lives not only in their cultures but also in other areas like mental health. I think I've seen the importance in talking about mental health publicly in my own life and through Cole Harper's character. So all of this kind of has gone into me wanting to see how these characters develop past that trilogy and follow their lives as the world becomes bigger and their problems become bigger, and how they handle that as this kind of hero, this hero team.
And in the original Reckoner trilogy, Trickster is a character, taking the form of Coyote. So does Trickster make an appearance in this new series? Can you let us know?
Well, I don't. If anybody hasn't read the YA trilogy, he was in a very precarious position at the end of book 3. But we do have little Easter eggs of Chach, who we call him, who's a coyote, who's a trickster, popping his consciousness here and there in the story. So he is a presence, but you kind of have to keep your eyes open for him. But he'd like to be in there. I'm trying to keep him controlled as much as I can, because he's definitely a hard character to control.
I think that's a really good way of putting it.
It's interesting because I've talked to other writers who've written Coyote, and we all said the same thing, that even in the novel he did his own thing, and it was hard to keep track of him. It was hard to control him. And he did things in the book that I didn't expect him to do or want him to do, but you have to kind of go with it because I lost the ability to control him as a character. And so it was fun in that way, but it's also difficult. And so I've multiple writers have said the same thing about writing Coyote. And so he kind of, I'm trying to keep him bottled up as much as I can until he's ready to explode in the graphic novel series.
I'm a playwright, and so one of the things that I've told playwrights who are sort of, first starting out or trying to write their first play is to just put the characters in the room together and see how they talk. Just let them do what they're going to do, because they'll take over if you let them. But I find I've written some trickster characters and they can be a little bit difficult to hold on to.
Oh, they're tough. They're really tough. I do the same thing as when I write characters, as I kind of live with them. And I drive with them places, and I'll talk to them in my office, and I'll just see kind of how they talk and react and exist within the world, and it helps me to write them more authentically. But Coyote doesn't suffer any fools or have time for any of that, so he just kind of does his own thing.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson, talking with author David A. Robertson, who has 3 books coming out this fall. So, you write books for kids of all ages. You've written graphic novels, picture books, and now you've written a memoir. So, is there a category of writing that you won't touch, or one that you one that you've tried that maybe didn't work or didn't feel right?
I don't think so. I mean, I work very hard at the forms of literature I choose to write in. And so one of the things I try to do is read from the best in the form that I'm working in. So, and I try to learn from the best and work to get better as I go through like the creation process and the editing process. I've found that I've been able to adapt to all these different forms of literature as I've kind of gone on in my career as a writer. I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't try. I do find that I'm probably weakest at poetry. I have a great admiration for all writers, but in particular for poets. I just don't know how they do it and how they do it really well. So people like Katharina Vermette and Rosanna Deerchild and Billy Ray Belcourt and all these, I just don't know how they do it. Like, it's just, they're so good. And I just can't quite get the poetry thing. Although at the same breath, because I can't get the whole poetry thing, and I feel like I'm not the greatest at it, I want to get really good at it. And so I will at some point probably challenge myself to try and write a poetry book because I want to get better. And I think the only way you get better is if you push yourself. And that's part of the reason why I write so many different kinds of books. The other part is that I don't want to be stagnant. Like, I don't want to just write graphic novels. I don't want to just write picture books. I want to continue to evolve and grow and get better and expand my audience because I have so much to say. And I think that the work that I have and the goal that I have for my work, I would like to reach as many people as possible. And to be able to do that, I need to write all these different kinds of literature. Because each form of literature has a different audience.
Thank you so much for joining us today, David. I feel like I learned a lot speaking with you about writing. It felt like a bit of a masterclass, so thank you.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It was great to be on and to speak with you.
David A. Robertson is a writer from Winnipeg. Earlier this month, he released his new middle grade book, The Barren Grounds, and his memoir, Blackwater, Family Legacy, and Blood Memory. To check out David's CBC podcast, Kiweo, which is a companion piece to the memoir, visit our website, cbc.ca/unreserved. If you want even more David A. Robertson content, next month his graphic novel, Breakdown, The Reckoner Rises, the sequel to the original Reckoner trilogy, will be in bookstores October 22nd. That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. We'll be back in this radio space next week for more community, culture, and conversation. This episode was produced by Stephanie Cram, Zoe Tennant, Kyle Musica, and Anna Lazowski. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at unreserved@cbc.ca or find us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Phelan Johnson. Nyawagoa for listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.